How many forms does a system need before it will open a door that a 20-year-old man cannot open from the inside? Authorization, supervisor, secondary address. Every word was a door closing in slow motion while my brother sat behind a padlocked one. I drove to SR 24 that night. I parked across the road from Garrett's Cove cottages with my headlights off and my engine running. The salt marsh breathed around me, frogs and Gulf wind and the smell of low tide. 3 rental units faced the road, dark and shuttered for the off-season. Behind the office, set back from the gravel lot, I could see the cinder block addition. No windows, a padlock on the outside of the only door. And at the bottom of that door, in the gap between the cinder block and the frame, a faint blue glow pulsed against the darkness. The tablet was still on. Coen was still in there. My brother was 40 yards from where I sat, and I could not reach him without a warrant, a welfare check, or a supervisor's approval that was still days away. I gripped the steering wheel and did not move. I sat in that car for 2 hours, watching the blue glow pulse under the door. Then I drove home, because I had a shift in 4 hours, and because breaking down a padlocked door would have put me in a cell next to my brother's. I went to work. I checked my phone between every patient. Willa's supervisor had not approved the secondary address visit. Harvey was drafting an emergency motion. The system was grinding its gears while Coen sat 40 yards from where I had parked. 3 days later, my brother rescued himself. I was not there for this either. I learned it from the 911 transcript, from the EMS report, from Boyd's testimony, and from the physical evidence the hospital documented when Coen arrived. But I can tell you exactly what happened, because every detail of it is etched into the case file and into me. At some point in the dark hours before dawn on a Tuesday in October, Coen stood up from the camp cot in Unit 6 and walked to the bathroom. The bathroom was a 3-foot alcove with a toilet and a utility sink. Above the sink, near the ceiling, was a narrow jalousie vent. Louvered glass panes in an aluminum frame, the kind you see in old Florida construction. Darlene had padlocked the door and boarded the front face of the unit. She had not thought about the vent because it was 4 inches wide. Coen used the edge of the tablet to pry the first pane loose, then the second, then the third. He stacked them on the sink without breaking them. Quiet, deliberate, the way a person works when 20 years of silence have taught him that noise brings punishment, not rescue. The opening was 4 inches wide. He dislocated his right shoulder, pushing through it. He cut his forearm on the aluminum frame. He did not make a sound. He dropped onto the sand behind the unit, barefoot, wearing boxer shorts, bleeding from a 6-inch gash. He was unsteady. His legs were unreliable because of the benzodiazepines in his system, though I would not learn about the sedatives until the blood work came back. He walked to the road, and then he sat down on the shoulder of State Road 24 and held the cracked tablet against his chest and waited. I did not run. He could not. So he did the bravest thing he had ever done. He sat still where someone could find him. 20 years of being invisible, and he chose to be seen. At 5:47, a truck slowed on SR 24. Glenn Overstreet, a crab fisherman in his 60s who hauled traps before dawn 3 mornings a week, pulled over when his headlights caught a barefoot figure on the road shoulder. He got out and found Coen sitting with the tablet pressed to his chest, bleeding, nonverbal, staring straight ahead. Glenn Overstreet did not know Coen, did not know the Lockwoods, did not know about the trust, or the guardianship, or the padlocked door 40 yards behind the palmetto hedge. He was just a man pulling crab traps who did what 60 church members and a caseworker and a judge had failed to do. He stopped. He called 911 from the cab of his truck. There is a young man sitting on the shoulder of 24, no shoes, bleeding from his arm. He is not talking. I do not think he can hear me. Dispatch logged the address. SR 24 near Garrett's Cove cottages. The call was routed to Levy County EMS with a request for the nearest available trauma team. Because the nearest Level 1 trauma center was in Gainesville, The transfer was flagged for Shands. I was mid-shift in the pediatric ER when the coordinator came to the nurses' station with a transfer sheet. I was charting vitals on a 4-year-old with croup. I was doing my job. Transfer incoming from Levy County, she said. Male, approximately 20, nonverbal, dehydrated, laceration to right forearm, suspected benzodiazepine exposure. Found roadside on State Road 24 near Cedar Key. State Road 24. I had parked across from that address 3 nights ago with my headlights off. Now my brother was coming to me on a stretcher from the same road. I set down the chart. I walked to the supply cabinet and pulled a fresh gown off the shelf. I put on gloves. My hands were steady because that is what 12 years of emergency nursing teaches you. Your hands work even when your mind is screaming. That is what we do. We put on gloves. I walked to the intake bay and stood at the doors and waited for the ambulance. I could hear it backing in. The steady beep of the reverse alarm, the engine idling, the paramedics' radio crackling with vitals I already knew by heart. The rear doors opened. Coen was on the stretcher with an IV line in his left arm, and his right arm splinted against his side where the shoulder had been reduced in the field. His eyes were half closed, the sedatives still dragging at his blood. His skin was pale under the fluorescent bay lights. I was thinner than the last time I had seen him, thinner than the fish fry, thinner than the funeral. But his left hand was clenched around the cracked tablet. The paramedics told me they had tried to remove it for the IV placement, and he had fought them, the only resistance he had shown the entire ride. No one had been able to take it from him. My brother held his voice in his fist, and he would not let go. They wheeled him past me, and I could not follow. A charge nurse I had trained, a woman 2 years out of school who had once asked me to demonstrate central line placement, touched my shoulder and said, "You cannot be in there. You know that." I knew. Family cannot treat family. So I stood outside the curtain in my scrubs and my badge, and I listened. The attending called for a second IV line because the first blew. His veins were too collapsed from dehydration to hold it. I heard the blood pressure cuff cycle. I heard the pulse oximeter clip onto his finger. I heard a nurse say, "He will not let go of the device." Then the blood work came back. The attending stepped out and found me standing exactly where she had left me. She held the printout at her side. "Benzodiazepine levels are elevated," she said. "This is not a single dose. The metabolite pattern is consistent with sustained administration over weeks. Who has been prescribing for this patient?" "Nobody," I said. "There is no prescription." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "I am placing an involuntary hold. In the ER, we have a phrase for what was done to my brother: chemical restraint. It means using drugs to control a patient who cannot be controlled physically. My family did not need a medical license to learn that trick. Someone, Darlene, or someone acting on her instruction, had been feeding Coen sedatives to keep him quiet in a room with no windows. The way you silence a person who has already been denied every other way to speak. I stood outside that curtain for 45 minutes. I could not touch him. I was his sister, and I was staff, and I was neither. I was the person who had spent 8 months fighting to reach him while the system moved at the speed of paper. And now he was 12 feet away behind a cotton curtain, and the rules said I could not cross. Willa Emerson arrived within 3 hours. The involuntary hold triggered an automatic APS reopening. No supervisor approval needed this time. No 10-day waiting period. No phone tree to delay it. She came to the hospital with a case file that was now twice as thick as the one she had closed in June. We sat in a consultation room off the ER corridor. The coffee in my hand was burnt, and I had not taken a single sip. "The case is substantiated," Willa said. "Neglect of a vulnerable adult confirmed. I am flagging it for law enforcement referral as well. The benzodiazepine levels without a prescription are a criminal matter. You closed the last complaint because the house was clean and the fridge was stocked." Willa set down her pen. She looked at the table. "I know," she said. then quieter. I know I did. Willa said, I know, twice. The second time was softer. That is what accountability sounds like before it becomes official. A person admitting they should have pushed harder the first time. Before I tell you what Dr. Whitfield found when she finally examined my brother, before I show you the report that changed everything in this case, are you still with me? Comment your guess. What do you think the family was most afraid the doctors would discover? Please note, some details ahead are adapted for storytelling purposes. The message behind them is what matters. Dr. Whitfield drove from Gainesville to the hospital the following morning. The court-ordered evaluation she had been waiting 30 days to perform could now happen immediately. Coen was in medical custody, and Darlene's attorney could not file another extension. I was allowed in the room for the evaluation. Not as family, as a medical professional providing continuity of care context. Harvey had called the hospital administrator and made the argument. It was thin. It held. Dr. Whitfield placed the audiological equipment over Coen's ears. The first time anyone had put professional instruments on him since she had done it when he was 4 years old. He flinched when the headband touched his temples, then went still. He watched her face the entire time, the way he watched everyone, reading expressions because sound had never been available to him. The audiogram printed flat across every frequency. Profound bilateral sensor and neural hearing loss, identical to the profile she had documented 16 years ago. He has the same hearing profile I documented when he was 4, Dr. Whitfield said. Identical, 16 years and nothing changed because nobody did anything. She turned to me and her clinical composure shifted, not breaking, but bending. I am noting in my report that with early intervention, hearing aids at 4, deaf education by 5, his communicative outcomes would have been fundamentally different. This is not a case of limited capacity. This is a case of manufactured limitation. Manufactured limitation. 2 words in a medical report that translated 20 years of locked doors and confiscated boards into language a judge would have to hear. That evening, Harvey called me from his car. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria staring at a tray I had not touched. The hospital admission meets the threshold, he said. Demonstrably in danger. Active legal proceeding. Those are Alma's conditions. I am driving to Chiefland tonight to open the safe. The sealed envelope. 11 years in an iron safe behind a wobbling ceiling fan. Whatever my grandmother had buried in there before she died, we were about to find out. Harvey was standing at the open safe when I walked into his office at 9 that night. The iron door hung wide. The envelope sat on his desk under the lamp, still sealed, Alma's block letters facing up. His hands were shaking. In 38 years of practicing law, Harvey Sinclair had never opened a document he was afraid of. He told me that later. He said he stood there for 10 minutes before I arrived, because he did not want to do it alone. We sat on opposite sides of the oak desk. The ceiling fan wobbled overhead. The pipe tobacco smell in the walls felt heavier at night, closer, like the building was holding its breath with us. Harvey read the conditions on the front of the envelope out loud. Alma's handwriting. Blocky. Deliberate. The letters of a woman who wanted no ambiguity. Open when Coen is demonstrably in danger and a legal action is filed. Both conditions met. He slid his thumb under the flap and tore it open. 3 items. A handwritten letter on lined notebook paper, 2 pages. A photograph, faded to orange at the edges. And an intake form from Williston Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, dated 1981. I picked up the photograph first. A young man on the bow of a shrimp boat, squinting into the sun, one hand on a rope line. He wore a white t-shirt, and his hair was dark and uncombed. He looked like my father. He looked like Coen. Same jaw, same quiet eyes. A man on a shrimp boat in the late 70s, and a boy behind a locked door in 2024. The family had one solution for both of them. Harvey unfolded the letter and began to read. Alma's voice came through his. Steady, careful. The words of a woman who had been composing this in her head for years before she put pen to paper. His name is Roscoe Lockwood. He is my husband's brother. The family told everyone he died in a shrimping accident in 1981. He did not die. He is alive. Harvey paused. He looked at me over his reading glasses. Then he continued. Roscoe had what the family called slow mind. Today I believe the word is intellectual disability. In 1974, the family placed him in the Sunland Center in Gainesville. He was 23. When Sunland closed in 1981, Roscoe was transferred to Williston Nursing and Rehabilitation Center. The family told the community he had drowned offshore. They held a memorial at First Baptist. There was no body because there was no death. I could not speak. Harvey kept reading. I found Roscoe in 1990. I drove to Williston and he was sitting in a wheelchair in the hallway. He did not know me, but he was alive. I have paid his bills every month since. My husband never knew. Clyde never knew. I could not save Roscoe from what this family does to people it cannot fix. But I can give you the proof that they have done it before. Alma drove to Williston in 1990 and found her husband's brother alive in a hallway. She did not confront the family. She did not call the police. She started writing checks. 30 years of monthly payments from a separate account nobody knew existed. 30 years of silence to protect a secret that was already a lie, because the only way to keep Roscoe safe was to let the family believe their own story. Harvey set the letters down. His hands had stopped shaking. When a man who has been holding a grenade for 11 years finally sees it detonate in the right direction, his hands go still. She knew, I said. Alma knew this was going to happen to Coen. That is why she built the trust. That is why she sealed this envelope. She built a pattern case, Harvey said. A family that hid one disabled member could be called protective. A family that did it twice, a generation apart, that is a pattern. And patterns are what courts act on. My grandmother could not stop what her family was. So she built a time bomb out of paper and patience and put it in a safe and waited for someone to come looking. I was the one who came looking, and she had been dead for almost a year, and she was still fighting. Harvey slid the Williston intake form across the desk. I looked at the billing section at the bottom. For decades, the payments had come from Alma's personal account, a checking account at Drummond Community Credit Union that no one in the family had access to. But 3 years ago, after Alma's death, the billing address had changed. The monthly payments had continued, but they were no longer coming from Alma's account. They were coming from Coen's trust. Harvey tapped the billing line with his pen. Darlene became successor trustee when Alma died. Within 6 months, she redirected the nursing home payments to come from the trust instead of Alma's personal account. She has been billing Coen's money to pay for the care of an uncle she told everyone was dead. The cottage rent payments, the nursing home bills, the canceled services. Every dollar Alma had set aside for Coen's hearing aids and education and future had been siphoned into maintaining the family's 2 greatest secrets: a man hidden in a nursing home and a boy hidden behind a locked door. I picked up the photograph of Roscoe Lockwood and held it under the lamp. He was smiling. I was the only Lockwood in any photograph I had ever seen who was smiling. Harvey worked through 3 nights. He cross-referenced every disbursement from the Trust Against Bank Records, LLC filings, and the nursing home billing office in Williston. When he laid the spreadsheet in front of me, the numbers ran in 3 clean columns down the page. Cottage rent, nursing home payments, and a third line I had not expected, $83,412. That was the total diverted from a fund Alma had built so Coen could hear the world. It went to 3 destinations: $61,200 in cottage rent I already knew about, $16,012 in nursing home bills for Roscoe, the uncle nobody was supposed to know existed, and $6,200 to Lane Prescott's law firm, labeled Guardianship Legal Services. I stared at that third line until the numbers blurred. She paid her own lawyer with Coen's money. The trust that was supposed to buy him hearing aids paid for the attorney who argued in court that he did not need them. Coen unknowingly funded the legal case that kept him captive. That alone is enough for a fiduciary fraud charge, Harvey said. He circled the Prescott payment with his red pen. But combined with the cottage billing and the nursing home redirect, this is a pattern of systematic misappropriation. Every dollar earmarked for Coen's care went to maintaining the family's secrets. I took the spreadsheet home and sat with it until midnight. Then I got in my car on Saturday morning and drove 45 miles to Williston. Williston Nursing and Rehabilitation Center sat on a quiet road behind a row of crepe myrtles that had not been trimmed in years. The building was single-story, pale yellow brick, with a covered walkway leading to glass double doors. It smelled like disinfectant and institutional lunch trays the moment I signed in at the front desk. I wrote Lockwood on the visitor log. The receptionist looked at the name and then looked at me. For Mr. Lockwood in room 14? Yes. A staff nurse walked me down a corridor with fluorescent lights and linoleum that squeaked under her shoes. She talked while we walked. Mr. Lockwood does not get many visitors. Actually, you are the first one in about 3 years. A woman used to come. Older. She stopped. Alma. She stopped because she died. And nobody came after her because nobody was supposed to know he existed. The nurse led me to a day room at the end of the hall. 4 residents sat in wheelchairs near a television. A 5th sat alone by the window, watching birds in a magnolia tree outside the glass. Roscoe Lockwood was 73 years old, a former shrimp boat deckhand who had lived in this facility since 1981, 43 years in the same building, on the same hall, in the same room. His hair was white and thin. His hands rested on the wheelchair arms with the stillness of a man who had stopped expecting the door to open but had not stopped hoping. The nurse said, "Mr. Lockwood, you have a visitor." He turned from the window. He looked at me with quiet, uncertain recognition, not recognizing me specifically, but recognizing something, the shape of a face, the name. "My name is Breyer," I said. "I am your grandniece. I did not know you were alive until last week." He studied my face. His lips moved without sound. Then he nodded, slow, deliberate, the way Coen nods when he understands something but cannot say it back. The visitor log had one name on it, Alma Lockwood. Monthly entries from 1990 to October 2021, the month she died. After that, the column was blank. 31 years of visits, then nothing. Not once. I asked the facility administrator for copies of the intake records and billing history. She brought me a file 2 inches thick. I photographed every page. The 1981 admission form yellowed to the color of weak tea, the payment records showing Alma's personal checks for 3 decades, and then the shift in 2 when the payments started coming from a different source. The trust. Coen's trust. Darlene had redirected the billing within 6 months of becoming trustee. 2 men, 2 generations, 2 locked doors. The family had one answer for anyone who could not speak for themselves: make them disappear and tell everyone they were fine. I sat with Roscoe for an hour. He did not fully understand who I was. But when I said Lockwood, he nodded again, and after a while, he reached across the wheelchair arm and touched my hand. His fingers were dry and light and uncertain. The same gesture Coen had made at Darlene's kitchen table. The same instinctive reach across the same family silence, a generation apart. I drove back to Levy County with my phone full of photographs and called Harvey from the Williston parking lot. "I have everything," I said. "Intake records, billing history, visitor log, all of it." "Good," Harvey said. "The hearing is set for January. I have the trust audit, the Roscoe documents, Dr. Whitfield's report, the APS substantiation, and the hospital blood work. We have everything we need." Then he paused. "There is one more thing. Darlene's attorney contacted me this morning. The family wants to offer you a deal before the hearing. Full custody of Coen. No contest. My heart stopped for half a beat. What are the conditions? Harvey's voice was careful. Silence. You sign an NDA. Roscoe stays where he is. The trust fraud stays buried. The cottage, the nursing home, the sedation, all of it sealed. You get Coen. They get their secret back. I sat in the parking lot with the engine off and Roscoe's window visible from where I was parked. He was still watching the birds. I sat in the Williston parking lot for a long time after Harvey told me the terms. Full custody. No contest. Coen today. All I had to do was sign away Roscoe and let the fraud die in a sealed file. I drove home and did not sleep. On a Tuesday morning in January, I walked into the Levy County Courthouse at 8:15. Lane Prescott was already waiting in the second-floor corridor with a manila folder and a pen. Behind him stood Clyde, Gail, and Darlene in a row, shoulder to shoulder, faces set, like a jury that had already reached its verdict. Prescott nodded toward a side conference room. Harvey and I followed him in. The room was small. A table, 4 chairs, no windows. Prescott laid the folder open and slid the document across to me. Tabbed signature lines in yellow. A pen placed parallel to the edge. Full custody, Prescott said. No contest, no 6-month review. Coen goes home with you today. All we ask is that certain family matters remain private. Harvey read every page. I watched his eyes move across the language. The NDA was comprehensive, covered Roscoe by name, prohibited any disclosure of the trust disbursements, required me to withdraw the APS complaint, and sealed the court record permanently. Every thread I had pulled for 11 months would be knotted shut. Harvey set the document down and looked at me. This is everything you have been fighting for, he said quietly. I need you to understand what you would be giving up and what you would be getting. How do you sign a piece of paper that says a living man does not exist? How do you take your brother home knowing you bought him with someone else's erasure? Roscoe was sitting in a day room in Williston watching birds through a window, and the price of my brother's freedom was making sure nobody ever said his name again. I stood up and walked into the corridor. Clyde was leaning against the wall. Gail stood beside him with her hands folded at her waist. Lean had not moved from where I had seen her when I arrived, planted, arms crossed, watching me the way she had watched me at every supervised visit. But it was Clyde who spoke. His voice was different. Not the measured authority from the kitchen at the funeral. Not the threat at the fish fry. This was quiet, almost soft. Briar, you can have your brother. We are not fighting you on that anymore. He paused. But what happened with Roscoe? That was a different time. Different people made those decisions. There is no reason to put it on a record. A different time. He said it like the past was a country nobody lived in anymore. But Roscoe was still in Williston. Coen was still in a hospital bed. The past was not a different time. It was still happening in 2 buildings 45 miles apart. To 2 men who shared a jaw and a silence and a family that could not tolerate what it could not fix. Gail stepped forward. Think about what is best for Coen, Briar, she said softly. Not what feels right, what is best. She had never once in 20 years asked what was best for Coen. Not when she stood in the hallway while he sat behind a locked door. Not when she returned my birthday cards unopened. Not when she let Darlene pull him from every service he had. She was not asking what was best for Coen. She was asking what was best for the family name, and she was using my brother's name to do it. I looked at the NDA in my hand. I looked at my father. I looked at the courtroom door at the end of the corridor. Heavy oak, brass handle. The kind of door that sounds like a decision when it closes. I said no. 1 word. The smallest sentence I have ever spoken and the heaviest. Prescott shifted his weight. Ms. Lockwood, I would encourage you to. Roscoe Lockwood has been alive in a nursing home for 43 years, and nobody in this family has said his name out loud since 1981. I held the NDA out to Prescott. He did not take it. That is what silence costs. My answer is no. I set the document on the windowsill and walked toward the courtroom. Harvey fell in beside. Behind us, the corridor was quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people realize a door they thought they controlled has just been opened by someone who is not asking permission. The courtroom smelled like floor wax and old wood and the coffee from the clerk's office down the hall. I pulled out my chair at the petitioner's table and sat down. Harvey opened his folder. The trust audit, the Roscoe documents, Dr. Whitfield's report, the APS substantiation, the hospital blood work. 11 months of evidence stacked in the order he would present it. Across the aisle, Darlene sat down and leaned toward Prescott. She whispered something. He closed his eyes for half a second, the way a man does when he hears the thing he hoped would not be said. The bailiff stood. All rise. Judge Cowart entered. The case number was called, and I understood that in the next hour, either I would destroy my family or my family would bury everything Alma had spent 30 years trying to save. Harvey touched my arm under the table. I nodded. He stood. Harvey stood, and I understood from the way Prescott shifted in his chair that whatever Darlene had whispered to him before the gavel fell was not a strategy. It was a warning. She knew what was coming, and she had told her attorney there was nothing he could do to stop it. I placed my left hand on the Bible and raised my right. The oath felt like the first honest sentence spoken in this building about my family. I swore to tell the truth about people who had built their entire identity on the opposite. Harvey walked me through the timeline. He was methodical, question by question, month by month, the way a surgeon works through a procedure. He did not rush. He did not dramatize. He let the facts carry themselves. When you arrived at your grandmother's funeral on February 14th, 2024, where did you find Coen Lockwood? In a storage room off the hallway. The door was locked from the outside with a slide bolt. There was a box fan running against the door to cover the sound of him tapping. Prescott objected. Cowart overruled. Harvey continued. Hyde took me through the guardianship reveal. The services withdrawn. The communication board confiscated. The cottage on SR 24. The hospital admission. The blood work showing sedatives with no prescription. I answered in clinical, measured sentences, the way I chart a patient history. Facts, timeline, observations. I charted my family the way I chart a trauma patient. Mechanism of injury, duration, interventions attempted, interventions denied. The difference was that the mechanism of injury was the people who were supposed to protect him. I did not cry. If I cried, they would see a sister. I needed them to see a nurse who documents what she finds. Prescott cross-examined. He asked about my misdemeanor. I answered. He asked about my decade of absence. I answered. He asked if I had financial interest in the trust. I said no. He asked if I had contacted Coen before the funeral. I said I had tried. Birthday cards returned, calls unanswered, every attempt blocked. He had nothing left after that. His questions were a wall with no foundation, and Harvey had already pulled the ground out from under it. Harvey called for Exhibit 7, the trust audit. He laid the spreadsheet on the overhead projector, and the numbers filled the screen behind the judge's bench. 3 columns. Cottage rent to the LLC, nursing home payments to Williston, legal fees to Prescott's own firm. Every dollar drawn from a fund earmarked for hearing aids and education that Coen never received. Objection, Prescott said. The inclusion of legal fees is prejudicial and overruled, Judge Cowart said. The trust instrument specifies permissible disbursements. Legal fees for the guardian's personal representation are not among them. Continue, Mr. Sinclair. The total glowed on the screen. Every cent that should have gone to Coen's ears and education converted to cottage rent, a hidden uncle's care, and the lawyer who argued his captivity was guardianship. Darlene's hands gripped the edge of her table. Her knuckles were white. Harvey paused. He walked back to the petitioner's table and picked up a final folder. He held it way, he held everything, carefully, deliberately, like a man who understood the weight of paper. Exhibit 9, Your Honor. A sealed letter written by Alma Lockwood and entrusted to my care 11 years ago, with instructions to open it only when Coen Lockwood was demonstrably in danger and a legal proceeding was active. Both conditions have been met. I would like to read the relevant passage into the record. Judge Cowart nodded. Harvey unfolded the letter. The courtroom was silent. I could hear the clock on the back wall. Alma wrote that letter knowing she would be dead when it was read. She wrote it to a courtroom she would never enter, about a brother-in-law she had visited every month in secret, for a grandson she knew the family would try to erase. She wrote it for me. Harvey read, "His name is Roscoe Lockwood. He is my husband's brother. The family told everyone he died in a shrimping accident in 1981. He did not die. He is alive in Williston Nursing and Rehabilitation Center. I have paid his bills since 1990. He paused. Then he read the last line. They will do this again. They are doing it now. The courtroom did not move. Nobody coughed. Nobody shifted. The words hung in the air the way smoke hangs after something has burned. I looked at Clyde. His hand went to the bench in front of him. Not for support, but for grip, like the room had tilted beneath him. His face drained white. Not the white of surprise, but the white of exposure. The color a man turns when a wall he has lived behind for 40 years is pulled down in public and the light reaches places he thought were permanently dark. Gail did not flinch. She sat perfectly still with her hands folded in her lap, eyes forward, expression sealed. That was worse. Clyde broke because the lie collapsed. Gail held because the lie was all she had left. Judge Cowart removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. She looked at Clyde. She looked at Darlene. She looked at the photograph of Roscoe that Harvey had placed into evidence, a 73-year-old man in a wheelchair by a window. "Mr. Sinclair," she said, "is there additional testimony?" "Yes, Your Honor. The ward himself would like to address the court." The courtroom doors opened behind me. I heard wheels on the tile floor. I turned and saw my brother being brought in. Coen, in a wheelchair, with a sign language interpreter beside him and the cracked tablet on his lap. They positioned him at a table facing the judge. The interpreter sat on his left. The cracked tablet was propped in front of him, screen glowing, the AAC grid waiting. Coen looked around the courtroom with the careful attention of a person who has spent 20 years in rooms where nobody expected him to understand anything. He understood. He had always understood. The family just never gave him the means to prove it. Dr. Whitfield took the stand first. She spoke the way she had spoken to me at the hospital, precise, unhurried, every word chosen for the record. "This is not a case of a man who cannot learn," she said. "This is a case of a man who was never taught. With intervention at age 4, the age I first evaluated him, his communicative outcomes would have been fundamentally different. The clinical term is manufactured limitation." She paused to let the phrase land. Then she continued. "In the 3 months since his hospitalization, with basic ASL instruction and the communication tablet, Coen Lockwood has acquired approximately 40 functional signs. He is learning at a rate consistent with a person of normal cognitive capacity who is simply never given the tools. 40 signs in 3 months. That is what my family stole. Not just his hearing, not just his freedom, but 20 years of words he could have known. 20 years of conversations. 20 years of asking for water or pointing at a door or telling someone his name. All of it recoverable. All of it withheld on purpose. Dr. Whitfield stepped down. Harvey stood. "Your Honor, the ward would like to communicate with the court. He will use a combination of American Sign Language and his AAC tablet. An interpreter is present." Judge Cowart looked at Coen over the top of her reading glasses. Her expression did not change, but something in it softened. The same shift I have seen in attending physicians when they realize the patient in front of them has been failed by every system that was supposed to help. "The court will hear from the ward," she said. "Take whatever time you need, Mr. Lockwood." Nobody had ever called him Mr. Lockwood. I watched the interpreter sign his own name back to him with a title no one had ever attached to it. His name, given weight and formality in a room full of people who were required to listen. He sat up straighter. The way a person sits when they realize the room is paying attention. The courtroom was silent. I could hear the ventilation system cycling. I could hear Gale's breathing 3 rows behind me. Shallow, held, the breathing of someone who is trying to be invisible. Darlene looked at the table. Clyde stared straight ahead at a point on the wall above the judge's bench, his face still the color it had turned when Harvey read Alma's letter. Coen looked at the judge, then he looked at me. His eyes stayed on my face for a long moment, not asking for permission this time, not checking if it was allowed, just looking. Then he raised his hands. He signed slowly. Each gesture deliberate and careful, the signs of a man who had learned them in a hospital bed 3 months ago and was using them now in the most important room he had ever entered. His hands moved through the air, and the interpreter watched and then spoke. "I want to live with my sister." 6 words. The interpreter's voice was steady and neutral. That is their training, to carry the meaning without adding emotion. But the meaning did not need emotion added to it. It carried its own. Coen paused. He looked down at the cracked tablet. His finger hovered over the screen the way it had hovered at the fish fry. Searching, navigating, finding. He tapped a sequence of icons. The AAC software processed them, and the tablet spoke in its flat digital voice, loud enough for every person in that courtroom to hear. "She knocks before she opens the door. She knocks before she opens the door." That is what he chose to say. Not they locked me in, not they took my words, not they drugged me or hid me or charged my trust for a room with no windows. He told the judge the one thing that mattered to him, that I knock, that I ask, that I treat the door like it belongs to him. That is the whole difference between love and captivity. You knock. You wait. You let the person on the other side decide. My composure broke. I had held it through the testimony, through the cross-examination, through the trust audit, and Alma's letter, and Clyde's white face. But 7 words from a cracked tablet in a flat digital voice undid 12 months of clinical control. I tasted salt before I realized I was crying. The courtroom was silent. I counted the seconds because counting is what I do when I cannot do anything else. 11 seconds. The clock on the back wall ticked through each one. Then Judge Cowart put her reading glasses back on. She opened the guardianship file in front of her. She looked at Darlene. She looked at Clyde. She looked at the photograph of Roscoe that still sat in the evidence pile. She began to speak. Her first word was revoked. "Revoked!" Judge Cowart said it without raising her voice. She read the rest of the ruling the same way, measured, procedural, each sentence carrying the weight of 11 months of evidence and 40 years of lies. This court finds that the guardian Darlene Garrett failed in her fiduciary duty, denied the ward access to funded medical services, and housed the ward in conditions inconsistent with the standard of care. Guardianship is revoked for cause, effective immediately. Darlene's hands dropped from the table edge to her lap. Prescott leaned toward her and whispered something. She did not respond. Limited guardianship of Coen Alma Lockwood is hereby awarded to Briar Lockwood, subject to review at 12 months. The court orders appointment of an independent trustee to replace the current trustee and conduct a full forensic audit of all trust disbursements from date of inception. Judge Cowart turned a page. She had not looked up from the file since she began. When she did look up, it was at Darlene. Furthermore, this court refers the complete evidentiary record, including Exhibits 7 through 12, To the Office of the State Attorney for the 8th Judicial Circuit for review of potential criminal violations, including fiduciary fraud, neglect of a vulnerable adult, and unlawful administration of controlled substances without prescription. The state attorney referral was the part Clyde feared most. Not the guardianship. He had already lost that the moment Coen spoke. The criminal referral meant the record would exist forever. You can seal a family secret. You cannot seal an indictment. Judge Cowart closed the file. She removed her glasses and set them on the bench. This court is adjourned. That is how justice sounds when it finally arrives. Not loud, not triumphant, procedural, careful, like someone opening a door they should have opened a long time ago. Darlene stood. Prescott took her elbow and guided her toward the main doors. She walked with a stiff posture of a woman holding herself together by refusing to bend any joint more than necessary. She did not look back. She did not look at Coen. She walked through the double doors and was gone. Clyde and Gail took the side exit, the one that leads to the parking lot, so nobody in the hallway sees you leave. Clyde did not look at me. He did not look at Coen. He put his hand on Gail's back and steered her through the door the way he had steered everything in this family, silently, from behind, with his hand on someone else. Gail went. She always went where he directed. 3 doors. Darlene through the front, Clyde and Gail through the side, and I went through none. Because I was not leaving. I was staying. That was the whole point. Harvey put his hand on my shoulder. One squeeze. He did not say, "We won," or "It is over." He started packing his files into the leather briefcase he had carried to this courthouse since before I was born. Alma would have liked how that went, he said quietly. I nodded. I could not talk yet. My throat was closed the way it closes after a code in the ER, when the patient makes it and you step into the hallway and your body finally registers what just happened. The gallery emptied. The interpreter gathered her things and nodded to me on her way out. The clerk collected the exhibits. One by one, the room drained of people until it was just me and Coen and the sound of the ventilation cycling overhead. I was still sitting at the table with his hands on the cracked tablet. The screen had gone dark. Battery finally dead after everything it had survived. He was looking at it the way you look at something that saved your life after it stops working. I walked to his table. I knelt beside his chair so my face was level with his. I placed my hand on the table and knocked twice. 2 taps. The same signal from the closet when he was 10. The same knock on the storage room door at the funeral. The same pattern on the kitchen table at Darlene's house. 2 knocks that had traveled through a decade and a locked door and a courtroom to arrive here, in an empty room with no barrier between us. Coen looked at my hand. He lifted his finger and knocked back. 2 taps. Slow and deliberate, the way he always did it, like he was saving them for the moments that mattered. Then he leaned forward and put his forehead against my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around him and held him the way I should have held him 11 months ago in that storage room, with no one watching and no locked door between us. He smelled like hospital soap and clean cotton. Not pine sol, not the inside of a room with no windows. He smelled like someone who had been taken care of. The bailiff turned off the gallery lights and left us the ones above the bench. That is how quiet the end of a war sounds. A light switch and footsteps walking away. I do not know how long we stayed like that. I drove him to Gainesville that evening. At a red light on University Avenue, I looked over and saw him staring at the streetlights through the passenger window. His face was tilted up, mouth slightly open, watching the orange glow pass over the glass like something he had never seen. He had never been out after dark without a locked door behind him. He was 20 years old, and he was seeing a city at night for the first time. Tomorrow the criminal charges would begin. But tonight, my brother was watching streetlights, and that was enough. The criminal charges came the first Monday of February. 2 complaints filed with the 8th Circuit State Attorney. 2 deputies dispatched to Cedar Key on the same morning, one to the house on CR 345, one to Lockwood Marine Supply on Dock Street. By Wednesday, Darlene Garrett and Clyde Lockwood had both been served. Harvey called me that afternoon. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Gainesville with a cup of coffee I had actually finished for the first time in months. The apartment smelled like dish soap and clean laundry. Normal smells. The smells of a life that was slowly becoming ordinary. Darlene was served at the house, Harvey said. Clyde at the store. 2 separate deputies, same morning. The state attorney is not treating this as a family dispute. She is treating it as a fraud case with a vulnerable victim. Darlene was charged with fiduciary fraud and neglect of a vulnerable adult. The complaint cited the diverted trust funds, the canceled services, the cottage confinement, and the unprescribed sedation. Clyde was charged as co-conspirator. His role as registered agent on the LLC, his participation in engineering the guardianship transfer, his presence at every stage of the scheme. Both faced arraignment the following week. 2 deputies, same morning. 20 years of silence ended with a knock on 2 doors before 9 a.m. I thought I would feel something sharp when I heard relief, or satisfaction, or even guilt. What I felt was tired. The kind of tired that comes after you have been holding a door open for a year, and somebody finally walks through it. There is one more thing, Harvey said. Boyd Garrett's public defender called my office this morning. Boyd wants to talk. Boyd. The man who had loaded a mattress into a truck before a hearing he already knew the outcome of. The man who had slid food trays under a padlocked door 3 times a day. The man who had photographed a cracked tablet screen at 11 at night and sent it to me because he could not sleep. Boyd offered full cooperation through his public defender. He would testify to everything. The cottage, the padlock, the daily checks, the sedatives. In exchange, he requested a reduced plea. Accessory charges dropped in favor of a misdemeanor failure to report. Harvey walked me through what Boyd's testimony would confirm. Darlene had ordered the sedation. She crushed the pills into Coen's water herself for the first 2 weeks, then instructed Boyd to continue. Boyd administered it. That distinction mattered. It made Darlene the principal and Boyd the cooperating witness. How many food trays does a man slide under a door before he cannot sleep anymore? Boyd did not answer that in his statement. He just said he sent me the photo because he could not do it anymore. I thought about the night he took that picture, standing outside a padlocked door, looking at 4 words on a cracked screen, knowing exactly what they meant, and knowing that sending the photo could destroy his marriage and his freedom. He sent it anyway. Boyd Garrett was not a brave man. He was a compliant man who found the edge of his compliance and stepped over it. That is not the same as courage. But it is close enough when nobody else in the family moved at all. His testimony seals the case, Harvey said. The state attorney was already strong on the financial fraud. Boyd gives her the cottage and the sedation firsthand. Darlene's defense collapses. I signed off with Harvey and sat in the quiet of my apartment. Down the hall, Coen was asleep in the 2nd bedroom. His door was open. Every night, he left it open. He did not want it closed. A person who has spent years behind locked doors does not want anything between himself and the hallway. The hallway light fell across his bed, and I could see his chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of someone who felt safe enough to sleep deeply. Coen slept with his door open. That was the only verdict that mattered. Not the court's ruling, not the charges, not the cooperation agreement. An open door and a person who chose to leave it that way. I sat with the criminal complaint printouts on the kitchen table and thought about what justice means when it arrives 20 years late. Coen lost 2 decades. Roscoe lost more than 4. Criminal charges would not return those years. No sentence would give Coen back the words he should have learned at 5, the friends he should have made at 10, the life he should have been living at 20. But the charges would make sure the record existed. They would make sure no Lockwood could ever claim it did not happen. and they would make sure the next time someone in Levy County filed a guardianship petition, a judge would remember what happened when nobody checked. Justice is a word people use when the system works. But the system did not work for 20 years. What worked was Alma's envelope and Harvey's patience, and a fisherman who stopped on SR 24. The system just caught up. The next morning, Harvey called again. The state attorney had subpoenaed the Williston nursing home records as part of the fraud case. Roscoe's existence would be entered into the public record. For the first time in 43 years, the state of Florida would officially acknowledge that Roscoe Lockwood was alive. "Can I bring Coen to meet him?" I asked. "Before the records go public, before it becomes a case file, I want him to meet Roscoe as family, not as evidence." Harvey was quiet for a moment. "I will make the call," he said. Harvey made the call. The nursing home agreed to a visit before the subpoena went through. I would bring Coen to Williston the following Saturday. But first, my brother had a life to start learning how to live. The first morning after the hearing, Coen stood in the kitchen doorway for 4 minutes watching me make coffee. I measured the grounds, filled the water, pressed the button. He watched every step. Not because he wanted coffee, because nobody had ever let him watch. Nobody had ever left a doorway open and let him stand in it as long as he wanted, without telling him to sit down or go back to his room. I poured 2 cups. I set one in front of him. He looked at it, then at me, then picked it up with both hands and drank it black. He made a face. I laughed. He did not laugh back yet. Laughter would come later. But his mouth moved in a way that was close. The first weeks were made of small freedoms. He slept with his door open every night, and I left the hallway light on. We did not talk about it. He stood in front of the closet I had filled with clothes from the thrift store on 13th Street and touched every shirt before pulling one from the hanger. He chose a blue one. I know that sounds like nothing, but he had never chosen a shirt. He had never stood in front of options and decided what he wanted. 20 years old, and the act of picking a color was brand new. That is not disability. That is captivity. I took him to Publix on a Wednesday morning. He stopped in the cereal aisle and looked at every box. The colors, the pictures, the shapes of the packaging. 20 minutes. A woman behind us with a cart full of yogurt cleared her throat. I did not move. He was choosing. He had never been allowed to choose. He picked a box with a toucan on it and held it against his chest the way he had held the tablet on the stretcher, like something he was afraid would be taken. Nobody took it. We bought the cereal. He ate 3 bowls that night. In February, he started ASL classes twice a week at the UF Deaf Services Center and enrolled in a supported living skills program. His vocabulary grew the way language grows in young children. Fast, hungry, exponential. By the end of the first month, he had over 80 signs. His instructor told me he was acquiring language at the rate of a hearing child, just 20 years late. 20 years is not a delay. It is a theft. He learned the signs for food and water first, because those were the ones he had seen on the communication board Darlene took. Then he learned want and need and go and stay. Then he learned names, his, mine, the instructor's. Then he learned the word that stopped me. We pulled into the apartment parking lot on a Tuesday evening after class. I turned off the engine. Coen looked at the building, then at me. He raised his hands and signed one word. Home. I put the car in park and sat there for a minute because I did not want him to see me cry over a word I had been waiting to hear him say for a year. One sign. The most important word I have ever seen someone learn. In March, Dr. Whitfield fitted him for his first hearing aids at UF Health. She had been waiting for this appointment since the court ordered the evaluation, since before that, since the day she pulled his file from 2008 and saw the recommendation she had written when he was 4. I am going to bring them up slowly, she said, adjusting the devices behind his ears. With profound loss like his, the amplification will not restore typical hearing, but it will give him environmental awareness he has never had. He will hear sound. It will be new. She activated them in stages. Low frequencies first. A soft hum entered the room. The ventilation system, the fluorescent lights, the building breathing around us, the way buildings always breathe if you can hear them. Coen went still, not scared, listening. The way a person goes still when they walk into a room and realize it has been full of sound the whole time and they just could not hear it. His eyes moved, not looking for the source, but absorbing the fact that sources existed. Dr. Whitfield clicked her pen. He turned toward the click. She set the pen down. He turned back. Then he looked at me. I was breathing. He could hear me breathing. I could hear the moment he realized it too. A small intake of air, sharp. The gasp of a man who has just discovered that other people make noise simply by being alive. He signed loud. Then he signed more. Dr. Whitfield laughed. She said in 30 years of fitting hearing aids, nobody had ever asked for more on the first try. She turned them up. That evening, Coen sat at the kitchen table with his hearing aids still in, turning his head toward every sound. The refrigerator humming, a car passing outside, my glass touching the counter. He was cataloging the world through a sense he had never been allowed to use. Then, he signed something I had not seen before. His hands moved in a pattern I did not recognize. I pulled out my phone and searched the ASL dictionary. The sign was brother. He was asking about Roscoe. Coen signed brother 3 times before I left the apartment that morning. Not to me, to himself. Hands shaping the word at the kitchen table while his cereal went soggy. Testing the sign the way you test a loose tooth, pressing to see if it still holds. I drove south on 19 with the windows down and the April heat already thick enough to taste. The bridge to Cedar Key stretches low over the marshes, and I had crossed it 10,000 times, but this was the first time I noticed how narrow it was. 1 lane each direction, no shoulder. You commit when you get on, and you don't stop until you reach the other side. The first thing I saw on 2nd Street was Lockwood Marine Supply. Closed. The hand-painted sign in the window read, "Closed Saturday," in letters that shook at the edges. That store had been open every Saturday since 1971. 54 years. My grandfather built the counter. Clyde had opened it the Saturday after Alma's funeral. The Saturday after my mother's hip replacement. The Saturday after Hurricane Hermine ripped the awning off and left the lot under 2 feet of surge water. It was open the Saturday they locked Coen in Unit 6. Now the lights were off and the bait cooler hummed to nobody. I parked at the marina and walked. Cedar Key is small enough that walking through it feels like reading a room. You sense who's looking and who's pretending not to. A woman from First Baptist stopped me outside the pharmacy, hand on my arm. "I've been praying for your brother every single night. We didn't know. I want you to understand that." I thanked her because there was nothing else to do with that sentence. She squeezed my arm and walked away, and I stood on the sidewalk feeling the ghost of her fingers. 3 blocks later, a man from the fuel dock, sun-cracked face, tournament cap, crossed the street to intercept me. He stood 2 feet back with his hands in his pockets and spoke without looking at me. "Your family's business is your family's business," he said. "Didn't need to go to court. Didn't need to go to the papers. Some things you handle at home." "We tried that," I said, "for 20 years. He shook his head and walked away, and I understood that Cedar Key hadn't chosen a side. It had fractured along a line already there. People who believed silence was loyalty, and people who believed silence was the weapon. Both camps thought they were protecting something. Neither asked Coen what he wanted protected. I drove to the house because I had to see it. The way you press a bruise, not to heal it, just to confirm it's there. The porch light was off. That light had been on every night of my childhood, a yellow bulb behind a glass shade. My mother replaced every 6 months, whether it needed it or not. Gail Lockwood believed a dark porch invited trouble. Now the shade had a crack running through it like a river on a map. Clyde's truck sat in the driveway. The boat trailer was gone. Boyd's trailer, which meant evidence. The yard needed mowing. The jasmine along the fence had gone wild, reaching over the slats like hands trying to leave. I sat in the car for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock. The front door was 30 feet away. I could knock. Walk up those 3 porch steps and knock on the door of the house where I was born and ask my father why. But I had spent 14 months knocking on doors that people deadbolted against my brother. Harvey's office. Judge Cowart's chambers. The door of Unit 6 that didn't have a knob on the inside. I had invented a 2-knock signal so Coen would know the person coming wasn't there to take something from him. I looked at that dark porch and that cracked glass and chose not to knock. Not because I was afraid, because knocking means you believe someone on the other side might open it. Clyde Lockwood had proved, across 4 decades and 2 generations, that he only opened doors to drag people back inside. I sat on the seawall where Coen and I used to throw bread to the pelicans. The Gulf was flat and silver, the sky white at the horizon where it couldn't decide if it wanted to storm. A mullet jumped, then another. The water accepted them both back without comment. I grieved there. Not loudly, not the way I had grieved at Alma's funeral or in the hospital corridor where they told me what sedation does to a 20-year-old brain. I grieved the Christmases Coen spent in a back room. The birthdays, nobody marked. 20 years of silence this town absorbed without a ripple. I grieved my mother's absence from that dark porch. Wherever Gail was, she wasn't in the doorway waiting for her daughter, and that absence said everything her presence never did. The town was quieter now. Not peaceful. Quiet the way a house is quiet after the last door slams. My phone buzzed at 4:47 p.m. Coen had never sent a text message before. Helene had been working with him on the phone for 2 weeks, but he preferred signing, preferred the tablet, preferred any communication that let him see the other person's face. Texting was talking into the dark. 5 words, no punctuation, no emoji. When can we go see brother? Not a question, a plan. Coen held the card on his lap the entire drive to Williston. 45 miles, with the windows down and his fingers pressed flat against the paper so the wind wouldn't take it. He had written it the night before at the kitchen table, gripping the pen the way Helene taught him. Thumb on the barrel, not the tip. And it had taken him 40 minutes to get 5 words right. I watched him write it. I did not help. The nursing home smelled the way it had the first time. Lemon cleaner and warm air pushed through vents that hadn't been serviced since winter. The same staff nurse checked our IDs and walked us down the same corridor, her sneakers squeaking on tile that caught the overhead light in long white streaks. She said Roscoe had eaten well that morning. She said he'd been sitting by the day room window since 8. Coen stopped in the doorway. Roscoe was in the same chair, angled toward the glass, his hands folded on the armrest. 73 years old. The jaw was Coen's jaw. The quiet eyes were Coen's eyes. 2 Lockwood men who were never supposed to meet, standing 3 feet apart in a room that smelled like someone else's breakfast. I signed to Coen. This is Roscoe. He's family. Coen didn't move. He stood in that doorway and looked at Roscoe the way I had looked at the photograph in Harvey's office, seeing his own face in a man the family had erased. One hidden for 43 years. One for 20. The same bloodline. The same quiet. The same room nobody was supposed to unlock. Roscoe turned when the nurse said, Lockwood. He didn't understand who we were. His cognition had been declining for years, and the name was a reflex more than a recognition. But he saw Coen, and something moved behind his eyes. Not memory, not understanding, something older than both. He reached toward Coen's hand. The same gesture. Coen had reached for my wrist at Darlene's kitchen table with that same motion. Palm up, Fingers extended, not grabbing. Asking. The Lockwood men don't grab. They wait for you to close the distance. Coen closed it. They sat together for 30 minutes. I pulled a chair to the corner and watched. They did not communicate in any conventional way. Roscoe couldn't sign and Coen couldn't speak. But they sat in the same room with the door open, and it was the most honest conversation anyone in this family has ever had. Roscoe touched the sleeve of Coen's jacket twice. Coen turned his hearing aids up so he could hear Roscoe breathing. Neither of them needed the other to perform understanding. They just needed the other to stay. The nurse brought juice. Coen drank his. Roscoe held the cup without drinking, the way old men hold things they've been handed, because someone handed it to them, and that was enough. Before we left, Coen stood and walked to the bedside table. He placed the card face up on the wood, centering it the way you center something that matters. 5 words in handwriting that shook at the edges. You are not a secret anymore. The first sentence Coen Lockwood ever wrote. The hand that tapped on a closet door, that gripped a cracked tablet, that broke a window screen to get free. That hand wrote 5 words and laid them on a table in a nursing home in Williston. I had to leave the room because I couldn't breathe. Roscoe touched the card with his fingertips. He didn't read it. He may not have been able to read it, but he touched it, and he didn't let go. Coen signed family to me as we walked out. He had learned that sign in February. He had been saving it for 2 months, holding it the way he held the card, carefully, deliberately, waiting for the right person to give it to. The drive home was quiet, good quiet. That night, I walked down the hallway to say goodnight. His bedroom door was closed, but not locked. He liked it closed now, not because he was hiding, but because it was his door, and closing, it was his choice. I knocked twice, the same knock, the same 2 taps I gave the closet door when I was 15 and he was 10. The same signal through the storage room wall at Alma's funeral. The same rhythm on the courtroom table when his voice broke through a speaker and filled a room full of strangers. 2 taps. I'm here. You're not alone. I waited. From inside. 2 deliberate taps. Clear. Unhidden. Not muffled by a locked door. Not masked by a box fan or swallowed by drywall. He knocked back. A knock is the smallest courtesy. You raise your hand and tap twice and wait. You let the person on the other side decide. That is the whole difference between a family that locks doors and one that knocks on them. I opened the door. The light was on. His hearing aids were in. He looked at me, a small, quiet smile from a person who was learning what it felt like to be found instead of hidden. I signed goodnight. He signed it back. The hallway was silent, and for the first time in this story, silence was not the enemy. It was peace. I spent 20 years believing that keeping quiet was the same as keeping the peace. I told myself my brother was safe because nobody talked about what was happening behind those doors. I made the mistake of trusting silence over my own instincts, and it nearly cost my brother his entire life. Don't make my mistake. If something feels wrong in your family, it is wrong. Speak before the silence becomes a prison. Some people will call this a revenge story. It isn't. A revenge story ends when someone gets punished. My story ended when my brother knocked on an open door and smiled at me like a person who finally understood he was allowed to exist. If there's a lesson here, it's that the people who lock others away will always tell you it's for protection. They'll dress it up in guardianship papers and family loyalty and tradition. But love doesn't need a deadbolt. I believe God placed me in that hallway at my grandmother's funeral for a reason, not for revenge, but for rescue. This was never a revenge story about getting even. It was about getting my brother free. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done the moment you found that locked door? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, Please subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story have been adjusted for storytelling and privacy. The people are real to me, and the lesson is real for all of us. Take care of each other. I'll see you in the next one.